faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, the book we'll interpret for you is called The Hot Zone. This book will take you straight to a global public health crisis triggered by Ebola. Ebola is a highly contagious and severe virus. It first broke out in South Sudan and Congo in 1976. Over the next 40 plus years, it erupted in Africa about 20 times with an average fatality rate of 50%, sometimes as high as 90%. Patients often die tragically around 2 weeks after symptoms appear, lying in blood and filth. This book tells the story of the most severe Ebola outbreak to date. It first emerged in Guinea, West Africa, in late 2013 and swept through 6 countries in West Africa, including Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, in 2014, causing over 10,000 deaths. The book details the true situation on the front lines of the fight against the epidemic in West Africa. When medical resources were extremely scarce, how did frontline healthcare workers struggle against the epidemic? What a tragic price they paid. Ebola, this deadly killer, what challenges does it pose to our medical ethics and humanity? The author of this book, Richard Preston, is an American nonfiction writer and a contributor to The New Yorker. Our Sally's Book Talk has covered his representative works, The Hot Zone and The Ebola Story. The Hot Zone was published in 1994, documenting the story of how humans discovered and researched Ebola from 1976 to 1993. The book achieved great success. It topped the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list for 61 weeks, and Preston was awarded the Champion of Prevention Award by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for it. Yeah. Okay. Preston is The Hot Zone was published. 10 years later, the major Ebola outbreak in 2014 brought Preston back to Africa. He interviewed numerous witnesses to the epidemic and published Crisis in the Red Zone in 2019. Before this outbreak, each Ebola incident caused fewer than 280 deaths. Over 37 years, a total of 1,539 people died from Ebola, while annually 1.3 million die from tuberculosis. And many public health scientists even believed that Ebola did not pose a significant threat to all humanity. But the 21-4 outbreak taught us that nature can do anything. So, how exactly did this historically most terrifying Ebola outbreak occur? Now, let's go back to the end of 2013 and start from its origin. In December 2013, in a village called Miliandu in Guinea, West Africa, a 2-year-old boy fell ill with diarrhea. His stool gradually turned into black liquid, and he soon died in his mother's arms. A week after the boy's death, his sister, mother, and grandmother also passed away, one after another. This little boy is known as the first known case of that outbreak. It was later speculated that he might have come into contact with bats and contracted Ebola. In recent decades, West Africa's population has surged dramatically, forests have been extensively logged, and cities have expanded into wilderness areas. Animals that locals once relied on for hunting, like antelopes, elephants, and wild buffalo, have nearly disappeared. People have turned to cassava and bats as alternative protein sources. Local children often grill bats as snacks. Bats, being Ebola's natural host, can transmit the virus to humans. Once inside the human body, Ebola can destroy the immune system within 7 to 10 days. It attacks all organs and tissues except skeletal muscles and bones, damaging blood vessel walls. Patients develop fever, vomit blood violently, and even uncontrollably expel their internal organs. Ebola also affects the brain in unknown ways, causing mental confusion and a vacant facial expression. At this stage, the patient experiences full-body convulsions. By then, 6 variants of Ebola had been identified. The boy was infected with the Zaire Ebola strain, known as the king of viruses, first identified during Ebola's initial outbreak in 1976. It once had a fatality rate reaching 90%. the deadliest variant. Thus, by chance, a few Zaire Ebola particles entered human society through the little boy. After spreading in southeastern Guinea for months, it finally drew global attention. On March 23, 2014, about 3 months after the boy's death, the World Health Organization confirmed the virus as Ebola. By then, 49 cases had been reported with 29 deaths, a 50% fatality rate. Just 3 months were enough for the virus to spread to distant regions. The outbreak epicenter was in West Africa's Mekona Triangle, where Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia share borders along the Mekona River. People often crossed borders by canoe, facilitating the virus's international spread. Therefore, as soon as the outbreak hit Guinea, a doctor in Sierra Leone named Humar Khan became deeply concerned. Dr. Khan was 39 at the time, a virologist living in Kanema, eastern Sierra Leone, and serving as chief physician of the Lassa Fever Research Project at Kanema Government Hospital. This project was co-founded by the Sierra Leonean government and an international research organization. The U.S. CDC classifies biological hazards into 4 levels. Lassa fever virus and Ebola are both top-tier level 4 viruses, higher risk than SARS or HIV. Symptom-wise, Lassa fever virus is similar to Ebola. It invades the brain, causes massive bleeding, and has no effective treatment, though it's less infectious and deadly than Ebola. 10 years ago, when Dr. Khan was invited to manage the Lassa Fever project at Kanema Hospital, his family strongly opposed it. The previous director had died after a needle prick infection while treating a patient. But Khan firmly accepted the job and became a renowned expert in Lassa fever virus. Dr. Khan knew that if the virus entered Sierra Leone, he and his colleagues would be duty-bound to fight on the front lines. Although Kanema Hospital hadn't dealt with Ebola before, it was the only facility in all of Sierra Leone with a dedicated Lassa fever ward. The fever ward had high-level biocontainment measures, and only its medical staff were well-trained in handling highly contagious hemorrhagic fever viruses. From mid-March 2014, Dr. Khan started preparing in 2 ways. First, importing specialized Ebola testing equipment from the U.S. to set up a blood sample analysis lab. Second, sending surveillance teams to conduct thorough searches in the Mekona Triangle for suspected Ebola patients to control the virus at its source. But he still missed the chance for early prevention. Now, in April 2014, a funeral was held in Kumdu, a border village in Sierra Leone. The deceased was a woman named Maimuna, a traditional healer. She offered herbal remedies to patients and performed exorcism rituals, earning deep respect from locals. Earlier that year, after she treated a woman who'd returned from visiting relatives in Guinea, both the patient and Maimuna died soon after. No one knew it was Ebola. Before the funeral, Maimuna's sister and mother washed her body according to local customs. In local customs, people sometimes use the water that washed the corpse to cleanse their own bodies, or even drink it. And they believe this can transfer the deceased spirit into their own bodies. However, Ebola patients sweat profusely, and sweat carries virus particles that cling to the skin. A palm-sized area of skin can carry tens of millions of virus particles. Moreover, as long as the environment remains moist, the virus can stay on the deceased's skin for up to 7 days and still be infectious. Because Maimuna was highly respected locally, over 200 villagers from both banks of the Mekona River attended the funeral. People expressed grief, touched Maimuna, and then interacted with each other. Epidemiologists. Later, it was discovered that at least 365 Ebola cases could be traced back to that funeral. After the funeral, the virus spread in all directions, including to Kanema Hospital 100 kilometers away. More terrifyingly, after genetic sequencing, scientists found that the Zaire Ebola that infected the little boy had mutated into several strains through transmission. Different variants. And the variant that spread from Maimuna's funeral was officially named Zaire Ebola A to the Makona variant. In the book, it's referred to as the Makona strain or the deadly strain. Makona is the deadliest form of Ebola to date. However, Kanina Hospital missed 2 opportunities to stop the outbreak early. The first time was in late March. A report from Guinea's health ministry mentioned a Sierra Leonean woman who died of Ebola. This was the patient Maimuna treated, but local place names were very confusing. And there was, oh, there, like, there was
The village where Maimuna lived, Kopundu, had 4 different spellings. The report wrote it as Gay Pundu and didn't clarify where it was.
The second time was in early May, about a month after Maimuna's death. Kanema Hospital's surveillance team passed through Maimuna's Kondu village. However, the villagers didn't believe Ebola really existed, nor did they trust the government surveillance team in protective gear. They didn't truthfully report about Maimuna and fled with their sick relatives. The villagers' fear might be related to Médecins Sans Frontières' practice of isolating cases. Over the years, whenever Ebola outbreaks occurred in Africa, Médecins Sans Frontières would go to assist. They set up white tents locally, put patients inside, provided water and food, and patients could only rely on their immune systems to fight the virus. Since there's no specific drug to combat Ebola, the only solution is isolation to block the virus's spread. But to the locals, it seemed like something entirely different. A group of foreigners came to the area, set up tents, and sent patients inside. When they came out, they were corpses wrapped in white body bags, fueling long-standing rumors that foreigners came to Africa for human experiments. On May 20th, the first Ebola case appeared at Kenema Hospital. By then, about 3 months had passed since Ebola entered Sierra Leone. And she was a 20-year-old female patient with high fever and uncontrolled bleeding from her birth canal. She had just delivered a stillborn baby and was brought to Kenema Hospital by her husband. While giving her saline injection, nurses noticed her blood wouldn't clot and kept flowing from the needle site.
Soon, doctors found another female patient showing Ebola symptoms.
On May 25th, both women's test results came back positive. Upon learning this, Khan sat heavily on the steps and smoked a cigarette. Then he smoked one cigarette after another. The next day, he gathered the Lassa Fever Project staff and briefed them on the situation. A nurse named Veronica burst into tears on the spot. She'd been infected with Lassa fever before and nearly died. After recovery, she lost all her hair and sank into severe depression, only gradually recovering years later. Her hair slowly grew back. She cried because Ebola was even more terrifying. Instead of comforting Veronica, Khan reminded her that she, like everyone present, was a medical professional. As Sierra Leone's only Ebola-capable personnel and government employees, they had responsibilities to fulfill. Under Khan's direction, the hospital's Lassa fever ward was converted to an Ebola unit. Surveillance teams meticulously searched the eastern border areas by vehicle. At one location, while trying to convince suspected patients to return to the hospital, locals, terrified of losing relatives, attacked the team with apple-sized stones. Fortunately, nearby police provided refuge, though their vehicle was burned. Undeterred, the team brought back 12 suspected patients. All had attended Maimuna's funeral. After testing positive, they were admitted to the Ebola ward. However, the epidemic's rapid progression quickly overwhelmed Kenema Hospital's capacity. The Ebola ward, originally designed for 12 patients, soon held 25. Some died while more patients kept pouring in.
Dr. Khan had no choice but to set up plastic tents to accommodate more patients.
The Ebola ward descended into utter chaos. Without exaggeration, these patients were like viral sprayers. Bleeding gums, bloody urine, explosive diarrhea, and projectile vomiting at any moment, coating nurses' protective suits with filth. Some patients seemed stable but would suddenly collapse and die within minutes. Psychological devastation unbearable for Ebola ward nurses. Gradually, some nurses began arriving late, leaving early, or skipping shifts as families forbade hospital visits to avoid bringing the virus home.
Even general ward staff fled the hospital. Without protective measures, they couldn't distinguish Ebola symptoms. Dr. Khan ran between wards daily, screaming patients.
He encouraged Ebola nurses and petitioned the health ministry for higher salaries. Nurses risked their lives caring for patients yet earned only $5 daily, less than 40 yuan. Officials eventually approved a $3.50 daily hazard allowance for Ebola nurses, but the funds never materialized. By mid-June, about a month after the first Ebola admission, hospital morale collapsed. Outside, the epidemic spread as people fled Makona Triangle via motorcycles, minibuses, and taxis to Kanema or distant Freetown, seeking help. Kenema Hospital's patients had surged to 70 or 90. Some arrived dead on motorcycles. Drivers dumped bodies at the entrance and sped off. Khan kept pleading with WHO and international agencies for aid. Yet the reality remained. The global medical community didn't know how to stop Ebola. Globally, Level 4 virus-trained medical staff were critically scarce and dispersed across West Africa. Few could be spared for Khan. Meanwhile, Médecins Sans Frontières, the most experienced in Ebola response, had already exhausted all resources. On June 12th, Dr. Khan held another full meeting with the Lassa fever team. He said, "Since most medical staff have fled, we must prepare for overtime. This is our duty. If even you quit, who will do this work? We must do everything possible, even sacrifice for our nation. At sacrifice for our nation." Weeping filled the room. Everyone knew some among them would die. The first death was an ambulance driver named Nyokor, a local who'd twice saved surveillance team members during village attacks. But during a mission, he made a fatal mistake. He removed his protective suit to visit local relatives. He didn't want to scare them. Afterward, Nyokor told no one. Soon after returning, he vomited blood at home. Colleagues suspected hemorrhagic gastric ulcers and admitted him to the hospital's best private ward, but Nyokor died there the next day. 4 days later, Nurse Lucy, who cared for him, tested highly positive and was transferred to Ebola ward. 30-year-old Lucy was pregnant, but the virus caused her to miscarry. Ebola has near 100% mortality for pregnant women. It kills the fetus and causes massive hemorrhaging during birth. Chief Nurse Mabulu Fani, called Auntie, the nurse's spiritual leader, decided to operate immediately to save Lucy. Nearly 60, revered locally, she delivered generations and ran the Lassa ward with global acclaim. As mentioned earlier, Lassa and Ebola symptoms are similar. Kanema's first Ebola case also hemorrhaged delivering a stillborn. Unaware then, Auntie saved that patient using Lassa protocols. Confirming Lucy's miscarriage, Auntie gathered 3 nurses for surgery. Extremely dangerous for medical staff. Massive blood or fluid exposure risk, infection, and disposable suits were critically scarce. Medical staff had to reuse protective suits, increasing infection risks.
The 3 nurses were terrified, but since Lucy was also a nurse, they decided to help her by performing a dilation and curettage.
Ooh. Auntie reached through Lucy's cervix and pulled out the dead fetus. Amniotic fluid and blood gushed out, coating the nurses' sleeves, masks, and suits. Despite their efforts, Lucy died after nearly bleeding out on the makeshift bed. Auntie and the 3 nurses contracted Ebola, then infected their caregivers. Author Preston said, "Ebola is a true demon because it spreads through our human loyalty and love." These very emotions connected Kanema's medical staff, ultimately linking every person on Earth, yet giving Ebola its opening. Later statistics showed at least 39 Kanema medical workers died in the 1914 outbreak. Lucy and Auntie were both infected via Nyokor. On July 20th, Kanema Hospital recorded its first case. 2 months later, Dr. Khan tested positive. Earlier, when Nurse Alex reported feeling unwell, Khan checked his temperature with a hand to his neck and examined his eyelids, unprotected. Doctor's instinct and care caused this fatal error. So, once again, Ebola's evil nature prevailed.
Khan reported his infection to Sierra Leone's health ministry.
The president personally called, saying WHO would send him to the US or Europe for treatment.
Before that, Khan transferred to MSF's treatment camp in Sierra Leone. At the MSF camp, Khan's condition worsened while his peers debated medical ethics around his treatment. And when medical resources are limited, who gets saved first? How? The debate centered on a drug called ZMapp. At the time, over a dozen experimental Ebola drugs were in development, but most hadn't started human trials. ZMapp was the most promising. It cured 18 Ebola-infected monkeys. Several dying monkeys reversed Ebola symptoms within 90 minutes of injection, unheard of in previous drug research. ZMapp's production was extremely complex. Only 6 official sets existed, each costing $100,000 with 3 doses. Set 1 was at WHO Geneva. By coincidence, Set 2 was stored by its developers at Khan's MSF camp.
But these drugs only passed animal trials. Unapproved human use risked severe legal consequences.
Even during outbreaks, using unapproved drugs required careful ethical weighing. Conditions included informed consent, free choice, fair distribution, and solid scientific evidence of potential human efficacy. Should Khan receive ZMapp?
Proponents were Khan's foreign friends and collaborators, top virologists and WHO doctors.
They knew Khan's medical judgment firsthand, believing he could assess ZMapp's risks, the ideal trial candidate. Moreover, Khan had become Sierra Leone's hero fighting Ebola. His treatment could inspire the nation, but to MSF in the camp, giving Khan ZMapp violated their core ethics. MSF upheld distributive justice, medicine's most vital ethic. It went equal medical care for all, regardless of wealth or status. If resources were scarce, they must be shared equally among patients. Would it be fair to give the only drug to Khan, a doctor, while sick children and the poor died beside him? Secondly, using untested drugs on humans troubled doctors deeply. Khan was human, not a lab rat. Without oxygen supplies, anaphylactic shock could kill him if the drug triggered it. Furthermore, treating Khan posed massive practical risks to the entire camp. As we mentioned earlier, locals distrust white people. Not long ago, another Médecins Sans Frontières camp faced violent threats from locals. If Khan died after receiving the injection, regardless of whether it was from the drug, locals would think white foreigners used experimental drugs to kill an African doctor. This could spark violence against the camp, threatening the safety of all staff and patients.
Camp leader Anya Rolls later recalled, "This was the most terrifying situation she ever faced within Médecins Sans Frontières."
As an insider told Anya at the time, whatever choice you make, it'll be the wrong decision. Ultimately, the Médecins Sans Frontières camp decided not to give Khan the drug, and other doctors couldn't administer it inside, but they could take both the drug and Khan outside to give him the injection. WHO also tried other plans, like chartering a flight to send Khan to Europe, but just before boarding, Khan started diarrhea and vomiting, and fearing a threat to the crew, the rescue plan failed. On July 29th, a week after being admitted to the Médecins Sans Frontières camp, Khan died. His funeral was held at Kenema Government Hospital, with about 500 people attending. Genetic testing showed Khan died from the virus carried by Lucy and Auntie. The author says Khan didn't let his team down, he died with them, and that ZMapp set number 2, stored at the Médecins Sans Frontières camp, kept challenging medical principles. This time, the doctor facing the test was named Lance Pyler. He was the emergency operations director in Liberia for Samaritan's Purse, an American Christian charity. Liberia also had an outbreak, and 2 American doctors from the group, Kent and Nancy, contracted Ebola while aiding there. Dr. Plyler.
With help from the U.S. ambassador to Liberia, he retrieved that ZMapp set number 2 from the Médecins Sans Frontières camp.
According to ZMapp's inventors, all 3 doses in one set must be given to the same person. If split between 2 people, the dose wouldn't be enough to kill all the virus, and both would die. This required doctors to apply the principle of triage. It's a principle medical staff often use in disasters when resources are very limited. Doctors must prioritize patients based on severity, sometimes having to abandon treating some. With only one ZMAP set available, he should give it entirely to Kent, whose condition was milder. Because if given to Nancy, near death, even if effective, she likely wouldn't survive.
This meant Plyler would let Nancy die, while untested ZMAP could kill Kent within minutes.
As a doctor, Plyler swore, first, do no harm. Yet now he faced a dilemma similar to MSF's. Either choice would fatally harm at least one person. The decision's weight made Plyler afraid to even touch the drug cooler. He prayed for guidance, consulted peers, until compassion overruled all protocols. He couldn't stand by while Kent and Nancy died. On July 31st, as Kent deteriorated rapidly, Plyler decided to split ZMAP between them. At 8 p.m., Kent became ZMAP's first human recipient. Miraculously, within 15 minutes, his fever dropped from 40.5 degrees Celsius to 37.8 degrees Celsius. 30 minutes later, he sat up in bed. Nancy received ZMAP that night, too. She survived. Both later got another dose in the U.S. and gradually recovered. After they used 2 ZMAP sets, 4 remained worldwide. 5 total received it, 3 survived, 2 died. When Anja Wohl's MSF Sierra Leone lead learned ZMAP saved Kent and Nancy, she asked, "My God, did we choose wrong?" Judging decisions by outcomes offers little guidance, but choices like Anya's and Plyler's may recur. Imagine yourself in their position. What would you decide? This is Ebola's brutal lesson. By October 2014, WHO reported 9,200 Ebola cases, nearly half dead, as the virus spread across Africa. The U.S. also saw several imported cases. By late 2014, this Ebola wave gradually subsided after ravaging 8 countries, including the United States and Spain. Ultimately, 30,000 were infected with at least 11,000 deaths. Sierra Leone lost 7% of its doctors. Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone's healthcare systems were devastated, their economies near collapse. Why was the Makona strain so deadly? Scientists discovered its protein structure allowed better binding to human cell receptors, like key fitting lock. Thus, Makona Ebola penetrated human cells more easily. Moreover, it infected human cells exceptionally well, but not bat cells. This meant Makona was human-adapted. It understood humans better than other Ebola viruses. Finally, how did Ebola disappear? Victory in 2014 relied not on modern medicine, but ancient rules. For millennia, Congo Basin residents used this against smallpox. Radical isolation. During outbreaks, suspected cases stayed in village huts with water or food. Survivors returned. If all died, the hut and bodies were burned. In 1976, this contained Ebola's first outbreaks, but Makona Triangle lacked this tradition. WHO later showed 80% of Sierra Leone cases linked to burial customs. Eventually, people realized Ebola wasn't fiction or foreign conspiracy, but contagious disease. They learned symptoms, avoided contact, stopped attending funerals. They restrained deepest instincts, no longer nursing loved ones, but sending them to isolation wards or MSF camps. Only this way could they save themselves and their families. Villages began self-isolating, cutting ties with the outside world. Médecins Sans Frontières officials believe behavioral changes helped end the outbreak. At the end of 2019, the world's first Ebola vaccine was approved. But this doesn't mean we've defeated Ebola. Viruses mutate, and the world remains unprepared for severe pandemics and global health emergencies.
Even in the medically advanced U.S., a level 4 outbreak like Ebola or Lassa would find only about 500 isolation beds nationwide for high-risk patients.
A Harvard virologist long insisted people should stock a month's food and medical supplies for epidemic self-isolation.
Preparation prevents panic, the virologist said. Author Preston argues, since viruses mutate, we too can change. Like Makona Triangle villagers did, we can alter behaviors to survive. We possess qualities viruses lack: human self-awareness, teamwork, and sacrificial spirit.
These elements drove human progress historically and will defend against viruses.
All right, that wraps up the Hot Zone. Reading notes are below the audio. Until next time.